It all started with the little girl and her horse. The park had closed until the new year, Randy fearing that if the Green Man and his army showed up, people might get hurt. The lady thought it was a bit drastic, but Randy told her that it would give her more time to make the new exhibits, too. You can unveil a whole new crop of new exhibits when we reopen in January. The lady had liked that, and now she toiled by the lily pond with the few brandy-low that we had spared her. The 4 brandy-low that Randy had sent her, Tobias among them, were under strict orders to keep her there and protect her with their lives. If she wouldn't fight, Randy said, then we would protect her the best way we knew how. He had deputized every other brandy-low, giving them clubs and telling them that their usual duties were suspended until after the situation was handled. That's how I came to be walking my night route when I suddenly heard the last sound I expected to hear. I heard the clip-clop-clip of horses' hooves. I was supposed to be on patrol with 5 other brandy-low, but I hadn't seen one of them. Charles and Razzie had likely stopped patrolling after it stopped being fun, and Margot, Logan, and Hamish had been drunk when they arrived and had gotten less sober as the shift went on. I was the only one still walking around on the regular, and when I heard the hooves, my light began to turn fitfully. I wasn't sure what to expect, honestly. I had recently learned that gnomes, fairies, goat people, pumpkin heads, and corn abominations were real, and I wasn't sure what I expected to come walking up the path. A centaur, a pegasus, I guess anything was possible after all that. I was near the 4th ring when I found the source of the noise, and I nearly dropped my flashlight when I saw them. The girl couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, her long white hair hanging down over the green mantle she wore over her shoulders. She was dressed in a perfect little suit of brown armor, and I thought it might be ringmail over leather, if I remember much from my D&D days. She wore a bow across her back and a little quiver of arrows. The horse she rode looked about 3 sizes too big for her, its perfect white skin and mane looking unnatural somehow. She was holding a map, the lines on it glowing slightly, and she was talking to the horse as she stroked its neck. "Come on, Artemis, the lady needs us. We have to find her." When the horse, Artemis I supposed, turned back towards me, I was in for a bigger surprise than the pint-sized warrior. The horse wasn't a horse at all. It was a unicorn. Artemis noticed me as she turned and lowered her head as she snorted in warning. The horn on the front of its head looked absolutely enormous, and I couldn't help but notice in the dim light of the steel lamps that there was a rusty tint to the last 3 inches of the ivory spike. I could probably dodge out of the way if it ran at me, but I doubted I could outrun it if it took a notion to chase me. The little girl looked up from the creature's back as it scraped its hoof against the concrete, and her eyes brightened as she noticed me. "Oh, thank goodness. Artemis, be good. This is one of the lady's servants. He can take us to her. Please, sir, can you show us where the pale lady is? I want to speak with her." I considered taking her to Randy instead, but the little girl had a way of speaking that reminded me of the lady, and that made me hesitant to disobey her. In the end, I took her in her strange conveyance to the lily pond, where the lady was working her magic. She was growing fruit trees, the fruit looking like an odd hybrid of existing fruits, and when the girl saw her, she squealed and dropped off her steed. "My lady," she said, hugging around the middle as she waded heedlessly into the pond. The pale lady looked down in surprise, but I was more surprised to see her smile as she stroked the girl's fine white hair. It was a very human action from Our Lady, and it always warmed my heart to see something almost human in her. As she stroked her hair, I was in for another surprise as the tips of her pointed ears poked through that satin sheet. Was the girl an elf? Once you learn that fairies and unicorns are real, I supposed anything was possible. "Gabriella, what are you doing here?" The little girl seemed to remember something important and stepped back as she threw a fist into her chest in salute. "My lady, I bring news from the Court of Moons. The Green Man is planning to move against you. He's marshaling his forces to..." "Your mother must be worried sick," the pale lady said, the water soaking into her dress as she took a knee beside the little warrior. "We have to get you home before she worries too much." The girl stammered a little as the lady tried to lead her out of the pool, pulling away with a splash as she nearly fell into the water. "I came all this way to warn you," she shrilled, stomping her foot and sending up a little wave. "He's going to attack you before year's end. Where are your armies? Where are your allies? Why didn't you ask Mother for help?" Our mistress was at a loss in the face of the little girl's indignation, and she seemed unsure of herself in a way that I had never seen. "Gabriella, this is a dance of summer and winter. We all win and lose in our time. If it's my time to be defeated, then so be it. As for your mother, I wouldn't have her waste her warriors on my behalf. The immortals are hardly to be asked to give up their precious gifts for the squabble of seasons." I started to voice something in the wake of her words, but it seemed that Gabrielle had formed a similar idea. "Then why is it okay for your poor Brandylow to forfeit their lives for such a squabble? Are they any less important than my mother's forces? I assumed he had snuck up on you, but you intend to just let him win." The lady floundered in the face of this fiery little envoy, and when she looked at me for some kind of support, all I could do was shrug. The kid had a point. However she meant to answer the child, it was rendered moot. Carl came clopping up about that time, calling for the lady and telling her how she was needed at the front gate. When she asked why, he just shook his head in disbelief. "There's about a dozen extras from a Lord of the Rings movie up there, and they look pissed." We were all moving in a matter of seconds, the lady in the lead as she glided for the front entrance. Carl had been correct, I saw. Randy and about 5 of his newly deputized security personnel were standing their ground against a dozen armed and armored warriors, pointed ears sticking out of their helmets. They had short bows bent and nocked, all except for the woman in the lead, her face inches away from Randy's as she stood her ground. She was fierce, her straight white hair cut short to reveal ears that jutted back past her shoulders. Her armor was silver, a contrast to the bronze-colored plates her fellows wore, and she had a long sword drawn back in preparation to run Randy through. Despite its proximity to my friend, the longsword caught my eye. It was beautiful, silver and spun steel, and looked like something from a fantasy movie. It caught the light as it caught my eye, and I couldn't help but be in awe of this powerful lady at the gate. "I don't give a damn about your assurances. I am the Lady Mallory Moonborn, Queen of the Court of Moons, and you will let me through to see your lady and find my daughter." Randy had his shotgun pressed against her breastplate, but he seemed to be having some real doubts that it would do him any good. He clearly thought these armored whatevers were from the Green Man, and they intended mischief. He didn't want any trouble in the park, and the Brandylow that he had with him looked ready to handle business. But they would have a time of it against this lot. "Ma'am, I can assure you that there is no one in here but us. Park's been closed for the better part of 2 weeks, and for good reason. Unless you want some problems, I would suggest you pick up your LARP group and head home. Unless you want trouble." Gabriella looked shocked as she rode up, calling out to her mother as we came to the scene. Her mother looked up, the queen of the moon court, looking relieved to see her child. The unicorn bowed to the queen as the little girl slid off, and Randy backed up as she went to wrap her arms around her relieved mother. The warrior queen dropped her sword and bent to pick up the little girl, holding her close as she silently scolded her for running off. The sight of her blade laying on something as mundane as our parking lot was strange, like a rare flower growing up through the concrete. Kinda made me wish I had a camera. As the pale lady approached, the queen's eyes narrowed, though I didn't think she was as angry as she was putting on. "I gave you sanctuary, brought you into our family, and this is how you repay us? I told you then, and I'll remind you now, your war with the Green Man is your own, and I will not—" "She didn't call me, Mother. I came to warn her about the green man." The queen looked at her daughter, not quite believing what she was hearing, and her gaze turned apologetic. "Gabriella, what have you done?" "She's our friend, Mother. We have to warn her." Gabriella was crying, but the queen looked like a rat that's just discovered it's trapped in a cage. "Nasri, how many do we have with us?" she called, one of the pale-haired warriors approaching to throw a salute. 12, ma'am. Another 30 searching the town and surrounding area." Their bows had been lowered, the mood shifting into something less dire for everyone, except the queen. She still looked like she expected to be attacked at any moment. The snow falling lamely beyond the borders of the park, and that's when I noticed something else. The snow wasn't the only thing creeping in. There was a fog, something that should have been impossible with the snow on the ground. It was thick and sinister, snaking its way into the park as it surrounded us. "Call them to us," she whispered. "Get them inside the gate." Nasri took a banded horn from his belt and blew a long blast into the crisp air. Immediately 4 others joined us, and their numbers grew by leaps and bounds as the queen turned to the pale lady. She set her daughter back on Artemis's back, locking eyes with her, and the effect was galvanizing. The indifference that I'd seen before melted away, and it seemed that Our Lady now understood the weight of what was upon her. She clearly valued the lives of these elves. I still wasn't sure what they were, but they were important to her, even more important than we were, it seemed. "How many do you count in your ranks?" 70 Brandylow, 13 tree sentinels, about 300 gnomes, and 30 or 40 moving trees. Whatever the queen had been hoping to hear, it wasn't that. "It will have to do. Gather your forces," she said, turning to Randy. "If you have fire, get it ready. If you have more of those," she said, indicating his gun, "I suggest you arm your soldiers. The attack is nigh, and we're already under siege." As the fog crept in and the shadows beyond it became more substantial, I realized the war we were promised was upon us. As the heavy gates closed, I wondered if we would see the sunrise the next day, or be swept beneath the encroaching night. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story, or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad and Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributors. Thanks to Saikat, Lee Kendall, Janet, and Chris Kinsella for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. And of course, thanks to Xaronan, Winter, Tyler Parker, Stephanie Carrington, Sarah ASMR, Hi Stacy, Emily Coltsfoot, and Cinnamon Fox, and Bella Lee for being our ghostly reader tier contributors. Thanks everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. As I said, if you'd like to have your name read out at the end of every episode that I make, and maybe get a little more, come on down to Patreon and sign up, or become a member on YouTube. Ghostly Reader tier contributors get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. So, what are you waiting for? Come on down and give it a look. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.